protests raging in Khartoum where an overnight military coup took place. The Sudanese military arrested civilian government officials, politicians, leaders, including Prime Minister Hamdok, in an overnight coup. This even as the military chief maintains that he ousted the government in order to avoid a civil war-like situation. While protesters are protesting against this entire takeover, there have been deadly clashes that have been witnessed in Khartoum. This even as Sudan was trying to attempt a smooth transition to democracy 2 years after a popular uprising toppled the Islamist autocrat Omar al-Bashir.
Sudanese protesters built burning barricades as they took to the streets in protest against a military takeover that saw the detention of several civilian ministers and politicians.
The people are mobilizing by themselves because there is no internet, no phone communication, nobody is leading us. Not the Freedom and the Change Forces or the Professional Association. The people in the street are leading themselves. We are not removing the barricades because Burhan's speech was not convincing. We will protest on October 30th.
People of Sudan are unconvinced by the reasons spelt out by Military General Abdel Fattah Burhan. In a televised statement, the military ruler dissolved the government and declared a state of emergency.
The Prime Minister was in his house. However, we were afraid that he'd be in danger. So he has been placed with me at my home. He's living his life very normally. And when things calm down, he can go back home. So he is with me at home and not anywhere else. Yesterday I was with him and many others were with him. He has not been kidnapped or attacked. He is at home. And once the threat is over, he will return home.
People are outside the residence asking the Sudanese forces to permit them to meet the Prime Minister if he is not held by force. But none has met Hamdok yet. People are not giving up on this hard-won path to democracy. 2 years ago, it was this political leadership and pro-democracy demonstrators from all over Sudan who got together and toppled dictator Omar al-Bashir, a ruthless Islamist despot who had ruled Sudan for 3 decades. Today, in the name of stability, General Burhan is doing the same.
The only deterrent to this issue is civil disobedience, comprehensive civil disobedience. This military couldn't be corrected without a civil disobedience. Until this moment, it is successful by all measurements. People can see that streets are empty. No movement. The working wheel is completely stopped.
Khartoum has become a hotspot, makeshift barricades and burning tires. Troops fired on crowds, killing some of the protesters. The takeover came after weeks of mounting tensions between military and civilian leaders over the course and the pace of Sudan's transition to democracy. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council was to discuss the situation in a closed-door meeting. Western governments and the UN condemned the coup and called for the release of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and other senior officials.
The Sudanese people has shown very clearly their intense desire for reform and democracy. Some military leaders feel that they have total impunity, they can do whatever they want, because nothing will happen to them. And my appeal, obviously, is for especially the big powers, to come together for the unity of the Security Council in order to make sure that there is effective deterrence in relation to this epidemic of coup d'etats. And we have seen that effective deterrence today is not in place.
Meanwhile, the United States is pausing assistance from the $700 million in emergency assistance appropriations of Economic Support Fund for Sudan.
So we are closely monitoring the events in Sudan, but most importantly, the actions to seize power are an unacceptable contravention of Sudan's constitutional declaration, which is the agreed framework for the transition as well as the democratic aspirations of the Sudanese people. Now, the question about a coup determination, as you know, when these events transpire, we typically do undertake a coup determination. However, Sudan has been subject to the military coup restrictions since the 1989 coup by the Bashir regime, and it will continue to remain subject to that restriction until the Secretary determines that a democratically elected government has taken office.
This military takeover during an ongoing pandemic and economic difficulties the world over could spell trouble for Sudan. Coups themselves have become an epidemic. This is the latest in a series of military takeovers in Myanmar, Mali and Guinea, and attempted coups in several other countries.
Brazil has decided to initiate criminal proceedings against their sitting president. President Bolsonaro and his government now have been accused of adding and contributing to the devastation that was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Brazil is one of the worst affected when it comes to the virus. The death figures amount to about 600,000 people, second only to the United States of America. A Senate committee in Brazil has now accepted a report that lists criminal intent on part of the president of Brazil when it comes to handling the pandemic.
The senators of Brazil on 26th of October formally accepted an indictment report of President Bolsonaro's actions during the pandemic. An 11-member Senate panel voted 7-4 to recommend prosecution based on the report, which concludes that President Bolsonaro should be held personally responsible for 300,000 avoidable deaths.
Nós vamos ao Alto Comissariado de Direitos Humanos da ONU.
According to the report, he delayed the purchase of vaccines. He told Brazilians to stop whining even when people were dropping dead like flies. He stopped local and regional governments from implementing restrictions, saying the economy cannot be made to suffer. He called the infections a little flu and made fun of those who wore masks and practiced social distancing. He told the people to go in for scientifically untested and quack solutions. For 6 months, a committee had gone over every action of Bolsonaro and his government's handling of the pandemic. The committee presented its nearly 1,200-page report calling for prosecution. Bolsonaro is accused of charges ranging from charlatanism, inciting crime, misuse of public funds, and crimes against humanity. Of the 13 charges, there is one of genocide against indigenous communities for actions that left them vulnerable to the virus.
It is possible that there are two crimes, one against humanity and other one deals with the genocide against indigenous communities. We have various documents proving the federal government's omission.
The report is not just against Bolsonaro but against 78 people in total that include the president's 3 sons, government officials and other politicians. A copy of the report will possibly get sent to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, because one of the charges against Bolsonaro is that of crimes against humanity. The report includes 2 counts of what is called crime of responsibility that provides the grounds for impeachment. But impeachment may not happen because the Speaker of the lower house is said to be sitting on more than 100 other previous impeachment requests. President Jair Bolsonaro, meanwhile, has denied all charges, and the decision to file the charges would now be decided by the Prosecutor General of Brazil, Augusto Aros, who, being a Bolsonaro appointee, might not prosecute his president.
People that used lies in the past keep looking at my chair and keep trying to remove me from here at any time with the most fanciful accusations like this pandemic, CPI that did not help anything, just took time from employees. 2 full days of Quiroga.
Minutes after the report had been accepted by the Senate, Bolsonaro's idol gave out a statement in his support. Former US President Donald Trump said Brazil is lucky to have a man such as Jair Bolsonaro working for them. He is a great president and will never let the people of his great country down.
We're looking at TikTok.
Bolsonaro is said to have projected himself as the Trump of the tropics. But just like Trump, he may not have another term in office. The elections are due in 2022, and what this report has done is to have put the blame of hundreds of thousands of deaths squarely at Bolsonaro's feet.
A big announcement by Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. The parent company's name, which owns Instagram, Facebook and WhatsApp, is changed to Meta. The rebranding now focuses on Metaverse, which is a virtual environment that will be created and could become an alternative to the mobile internet space. It is not a surprise that this rebranding and rechristening comes at a time when Facebook is mired in controversy. Here's more.
As he faces scrutiny from lawmakers and regulators at home and abroad, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg on Thursday announced a rebrand of the company he founded in 2004.
Our company is now Meta.
The name change comes as the world's largest social media company battles criticism over its market power, algorithm, and abuse on its platforms. Speaking at the company's live-streamed virtual and augmented reality conference, Zuckerberg said it reflects the company's ambition to build the metaverse, which it bets will be the successor to the mobile internet.
And you're going to be able to do almost anything you can imagine. Get together with friends and family, work, learn, play, shop, create, as well as entirely new categories that don't really fit how we think about computers or phones today.
A term coined in a dystopian novel 3 decades ago and now buzzing in Silicon Valley, Metaverse refers broadly to the idea of a shared virtual environment.
Hi, Mark. What's up, Mark?
The company, which has invested heavily in augmented and virtual reality, said the change would bring together its different apps and technologies under one new brand and would not change its corporate structure. With about 2.9 billion monthly users, the company has faced increased scrutiny, especially after Facebook employee Frances Haugen leaked documents she said showed the company chose profit over user safety. Zuckerberg earlier this week said the documents were being used to paint a false picture. On Thursday, as Zuckerberg addressed the conference, the company unveiled a new sign at its headquarters in Menlo Park, California, replacing its thumbs-up like logo with a blue infinity icon. Its stock ticker will also change to MVRS on December 1st, but the company's namesake social media service will continue to be called Facebook.
Time for a short break here on World Today. On the other side, we'll be talking about the big climate summit that is to take place in Glasgow, United Kingdom. Welcome back to World Today. It is make or break time for the world. When world leaders meet at the 26th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they will meet with the realization that time has run out. UN Chief Antonio Guterres sounded code red for humanity. Will the leaders now step up? What can be expected from COP26? Senior journalist Bahar Dutt reports for World Today.
This is going to be difficult. This is going to be a big, big challenge.
It may be code red for humanity, but in Glasgow, the president of COP26, that's hosting the summit, has admitted that challenging times lay ahead. The plan is to get 200 countries to agree on a plan to save the planet. The past decade was the warmest on record, and the UK government that's hosting this summit is pushing for tough action to save the planet. As many as 25,000 people are expected in Glasgow, including world leaders, negotiators and protesters.
There's still a possibility that there's a window of time in which we can change things. So we're going to do everything we can in that period of time to make sure that we push in the right direction.
The aim of COP26 is to curb emissions, get countries to agree to keep the goal of 1.5 degrees of global warming within reach, and raise funds for climate finance. But that's easier said than done. Getting over 200 countries to agree to a common goal, with the world still reeling from the impact of COVID-19, will be challenging. So what are some of the sticky issues that prevent countries from agreeing for a common path to save our future? The developed world is responsible for emissions in the past. The developing world wants help in reducing their emissions and coping with climate change. In 2009, the $100 billion US fund promised by high-income countries will only be delivered by 2023. The G20 summit in Rome, just a few days before, will set the tone for what to expect in Glasgow. Talks on coal use, net zero goals, and climate finance will be central to the discussions. If leaders can make progress at G20, it'll be a major boost for the climate talks. UK has set a target for the meeting to consign coal to history. That may not be agreeable to many developing countries like India that still depend on coal to fuel their economy. There is also pressure on countries to submit net zero targets. But with no commitment to finance this transition to a low-carbon pathway, the developing world feels cheated.
The big climate circus is in town. Around 25,000 people will meet at Glasgow, Scotland. The question is, will they be able to finalize a deal that's just for the developing world and good for the planet? For India, the two key themes will be climate justice and finance.
And here's World at a Glance with some other stories from across the world. Take a look.
Japanese Princess Mako married a commoner and lost her royal status. On 26th October morning, she left the palace wearing a pale blue dress, bidding goodbye to her parents, Crown Prince Akishino and Crown Prince Kiko, and her sister Kako. Mako has declined the 140 million yen, which translates to $1.23 million dowry to which she was entitled for leaving the imperial family. Portugal's parliament rejected the minority socialist government's proposed state budget for 2022. The move is expected to trigger a snap election and put a brake on the country's post-pandemic recovery plans. After weeks of negotiations, the moderate socialists are deserted by their hard left allies from the Communist Party and the left bloc. Recent opinion polls suggest the Socialist Party would easily win an election, but when it comes to forming a government, they might again fall short of a parliamentary majority. US authorities launched a new battle to make Julian Assange face American justice in a hearing at the UK's High Court. US authorities told British judges if they agree to extradite the WikiLeaks founder on espionage charges, he would serve any US prison sentence he receives in his native Australia. Lawyers for Assange argue that he's acting as a journalist and is entitled to First Amendment freedom of speech protections for publishing documents that exposed US military wrongdoing in Iraq and Afghanistan. China slammed military interactions between the US and Taiwan after the Taiwanese president confirmed the presence of a small number of US troops on the island to help train their counterparts. Earlier, Taiwan's president said in an interview that she was confident that the US would defend Taiwan if China made a move against the island. Although the US has no formal diplomatic relationship with the Taiwanese government, it has strong unofficial ties. Under the Trump administration, the US stepped up weapons sales to Taiwan.
That's all in this edition of World Today. We'll see you next week with some other stories, international developments, and in-depth perspective on what's happening from across the world. Take care and goodbye.